Well, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us on this hot Monday afternoon. I hope you're all feeling comfortable. The windows are open and fresh air and cool drinks are by your side for this long-awaited webinar, Cratus webinar with Lord Heseltine. I'm Nick Kilby. I'm the Chief Executive of Cratus and I'll be acting as your host. With me, I have Heather Jameson, the editor of the Municipal Journal. Mike Emmerich of Metro Dynamics will be joining us. And we also have Chris Blackhurst, the former business editor of the Evening Standard and the former editor of the Independent newspaper. So thank you to Heather and Chris for joining me to be with Lord Heseltine this afternoon. I'm delighted to introduce our distinguished and principal guest, who was wonderful as the inaugural speaker at the Chamberlain Lecture for us, and who has who's going to share with us the challenges of what the country faces in Build Back Better. Then, after we've had that conversation, Lord Heseltine has introduced that conversation to us. We're then going to start to break down three of those major issues and start having some conversation. It's a conversation that I think is just not happening at the moment, and I hope that we'll help move that forward and use the afternoon well. Lord Heseltine, thank you for joining us. In February, you wrote effectively an open letter to, in the Telegraph, to the 30 businessmen and women who have joined the government's Build Back Better Council. In that, you shared a lot of the wisdom that you've gained over the years in building back after various economic events, and you set three questions that they should ask. And I would love for you now to share with us what you put into that article way back in February, and for us to then come out of that with the three questions that we can start to address how they can be responded to. So can I ask you to take over?
Yes, how kind. I'm delighted to have a chance to take part in this seminar. I think the interesting question is, the 30 businessmen, do they think they've made a difference? Because in my experience, they haven't. I'm afraid that there is a temptation for politicians to create a sort of initiative which won't do them any harm, but gives an appearance of action. And inviting 30 distinguished businessmen has a sound about it. Or these are serious people. They will, make a contribution. But the truth is that it really, in answering the first of my questions, is government fitted for a real agenda of building back better? The answer is no. And as the government itself is not fitted for such a purpose, the 30 businessmen are not going to make any difference. I find this deeply saddening because the language of devolution is very good. The Build Back Better is ideal if someone would actually get on and do it. But what they're actually doing is what governments have always done, and what governments have always done is to announce initiative after initiative, functionally based. You'll get something from the Ministry of Transport about some road schemes. You'll get something from the Housing Ministry about more planning applications or something. You'll get something from the Education Department about some particular initiative that affects schools or higher education. But all of these are designed in Whitehall to suit the functional power structure of the baronies of Whitehall. And what is missing is any real attempt to go to where there are identifiable economies and ask the simple questions. What could we do to make these economies work more effectively? And if you like, this is, well, any businessman would know this. These 30 businessmen, they would all know that if they were faced with a reappraisal, they would do a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. So if somebody says to me, well, look, what about Blackpool? First thing I would not do is go to Whitehall and say, what should we do for Blackpool? My first journey would be to Blackpool. And I would say, I would spend a bit of time there, and I would talk to anyone who wanted to talk to me, and I would walk around, and I'd look around, and I'd ask some questions. And the first question would be, who's in charge? Who is the person responsible for driving this local economy? Now, in many cases, the answer is profoundly unsatisfactory. But fortunately, in the metro economies, Manchester, Liverpool, West Midlands, West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, we have now got the mayoral structure. So the answer is very clear. The mayor is in charge. And that was a very substantial addition to what the Blair government did in creating a mayor in London. So a lot of the bigger economies in England have now got someone who answers that question, who's in charge. But since the days of David Cameron and George Osborne and Greg Clark, the power structure affecting these local economies has hardly changed. It's true there have been one or two new ones in South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, but by and large, what was there when George Osborne, as Chancellor, drove a lot of this agenda with Greg Clark, is what's there today, despite the fact that in the election campaign, the Prime Minister promised that the powers that Manchester have got, because they've got more powers than the others, would be levelled up. Hasn't happened. And there's no excuse for that at all. Then you go to places like Nottingham, Derby, or Solent, and there is no coherent economic framework for anyone to be in charge of. So there are no mayoral authorities. Well, they should be, and this should have happened many months ago. So the first question is government suited? No. Then another question is there anyone in charge? Well, there is, but they have, in many cases, but they haven't been given the powers that they ought to have and they need. But of course, that's only a partial answer, because not only are there no mayoral authorities in the two big economies I mentioned, but you're then left with the county councils. Now, I first became involved in this whole issue in the 1960s when the Redcliffe-Maud report analysed English local government. There were 1,300 authorities. Redcliffe-Maud recommended they were reduced to 60. And all this did really was to recognise that there were 1,300 authorities to suit the days and conditions when the only way to move around was either ride or walk. And so with the coming of the trains and the telephones and all of that, and now the internet, the idea that you need a fraction of the number of economies that we used to have is unthinkable. So Redcliffe-Maud said 60. We in the 60s got it down to about 300, and it's about 300 now. And the major reason why there are too many is because in the counties you've got two tiers. You've got the county council, and then you've got the district councils. And of course they have a different agenda. They have lots of different councillors, and the first thing that should happen is to go close to the Redcliffe-Maud proposals, go for unitary counties. That movement has begun. There are unitary counties, but there are not enough, and the momentum has not been continued, and there are no mayoral counties. In other words, one person in charge. That is another example of the failure of government to address this particular issue. So the essence of my experience, all my experience in urban regeneration, is that look at the facts on the ground, see what the opportunities are, what the strengths, the weaknesses are, create a team to deal with it, put somebody in charge, and then give them access to the powers and the resources that are necessary. This is not absolutism. It's not saying, here's the money, get on with it. It is saying, we in central government will join partnership with you, but you've got to create the framework because you are the people on the ground who know what the problems and the opportunities are. And in the last 2 years or so, Whitehall has just stagnated. There has been, well, there are all sorts of ways of describing it, but the result of it all is that nothing's happening.
This weekend, I read about London Docklands in the Financial Times, and when you got involved with that, you put the powers into the development corporations. At the moment, there are, I think I'm right in saying there are 2 development corporations. One is Ebbsfleet and one is Old Oak Common that are currently in place. From your experience, would you look to create those bodies as well? Or do you think the combined authorities are vehicles of its era, and going back to the development corporations is not something that you would suggest?
No, I think we've got a marvellous example by way of answer to your question, and that is Tees Valley. But one of the last things I did when I was advising the government was to help create a development corporation, a mayoral development corporation on Tees Valley. And of course, we now have Ben Hoochin, who's doing a good job as a newly elected mayor of Tees Valley. And the government has announced a free port in the area of the development corporation. And in today's papers, I read stories of very substantial potential investment because people have got confidence that there is someone in charge. There's an agency with the powers to act and resources to act. And what was the collapse of the steel industry there, a deeply difficult economic situation a few years ago, has now turned into a real opportunity. That will be real leveling up because it will create a lot of new jobs and higher paid jobs for many people who were there before. So there is a very clear example of what needs to have. You have a mayor over a wider area. Where there are acute areas of deprivation, you have a development corporation, a mayoral development corporation.
Brilliant. Heather, the issue of the state of local government, the creation of unitaries, you've got your finger on the pulse of how people are feeling. There's been some movement in Somerset, and we've struggled in other parts. Is government ready for that? And is local government ready for moving forward on creating smaller, more powerful councils?
Well, I think, and to start off with, I would say it's not necessarily smaller, more powerful councils. I kind of think it's a mixture of the two, isn't it? It's larger councils in some cases, you're getting rid of the districts. I would say that it's been a mixed picture. I think there's been a lot of, I think the mayoral model was what put counties off local government devolution, just because it was seen as a challenge. I think it's always going to be difficult, isn't it, to ask people to scrap their own authority, but effectively, regardless of what model of unitarisation you're going for, whether you're going for a county-based or a district-based, it's still, you're getting rid of both sides and creating something new. Personally, if I was going to put money on it, I would say the door is a bit open at the moment. It's as we move forward, there's undoubtedly going to be another round of austerity to try and claw back some of the cash that the government has been hemorrhaging over the COVID period. And there's going to be quite a lot of councils that are just not viable financially, and the only way that they're going to be able to survive is to reorganise and sign up with other councils in order to make ends meet. And I'm not entirely sure that's the way that I would want it to go. I would want it to be a bit more of a decided, a conscious effort to move into a different space. But I think it's going to be a financial imperative.
What I find interesting about the hesitancy of people going because of the mayoral title is there are very few councils I can think of that there is anyone other than the leader of the council who is the leading voice. And I do wonder sometimes where we get hung up over the title of a mayor And in fact, we have the person in charge, as Lord Heseltine has said, who will identify as the person with the power to make a difference. And maybe we should be flexible in the name that we apply. At the end of the day, we're looking for someone to take charge of the community and the economics, are we not? Lord Heseltine, would you die in the wall over?
2 points. Your first one, the Heather's point. Of course, there's going to be an economic pressure, but getting rid of weaker councils is a sort of, as an economic gesture, is the worst way to do it. What you really want to do is create strong, powerful ones. And by and large, I would go for unitary counties. I wouldn't muck about. It's what I did in Scotland and Wales in the 1990s. And nobody wants to bring the districts back. But what's the point of having a majority of 80 if you can't govern? That's the truth of the matter. Now, if you say to me, who wants it? Well, of course the councillors don't want it. Of course the government ministers don't want it. Of course the civil servants don't want it. Because in every case, they're losing power and influence. And it is that massive dispersal of power that is the problem. If you're a mayor of one of our great economies at the moment, and you have a strategic idea to advance your economy, you know you have to make about 10 phone calls to get a reaction out of government. You have to ring the housing ministry, the transport ministry, Homes England, all these sort of people, find out what they think, and then what you'll know. You will know that there are 10 different views. And there is absolutely no coordination in central government to help and sponsor good ideas coming up from the economies themselves. So I'm afraid I think we've mucked around with this thing since Redcliffe Maud, and we need to do the job properly. Now you say that the leader is effectively the mayor. Far from it. The fact is that the leader leads a political party which has secured control of a majority of the wards in the area. And they all know where those wards are. And there is a temptation for a Conservative-run council to look after its wards, for a Labour-run council to look after its wards, maybe a bit of fuss about the marginal ones. That's not enough. What we want is somebody who can capture the imagination of the entire electorate, somebody who knows in seeking election they have to go for votes in every part of that conurbation. And so they become an established figure. And you can see the mayoral authorities are beginning to achieve this, in my view, with notable success. It's throwing up personalities, it's throwing up leadership, and that's exactly what one hoped would happen. Indeed, you are beginning to see people talk about some of the mayors as potential leaders of the country. That's exactly what we should have. People climbing the role of local government in order to then go into Parliament and apply the solutions nationally. Am I quoting Joseph Chamberlain?
I think you may be. What I'd like to do is, Mike, Emmerich, thank you very much for joining us. Mike, where are you?
I'm in the executive members meeting room in the Cunard building in Liverpool. I've been with Tony Reeves and his team today, plotting the next stage of their journey. Irrelevant, I think you'll agree.
I understand our principal guest is still extremely popular in Liverpool.
He is.
Can't be said for many people of his political background. Mike, how do we transfer this? Because I accept the point, actually, that the change to mayoral system is vitally important. It is the accountability and the marginalisation. And you see some of the changes of administrations all on one ward can take an administration out. We need that stronger political standpoint. But how are we going to accelerate it? Because at the moment we're doing it in a very passive, welcoming people who want to make the change. But economically, the overall argument is that we need to have change fast. And your company's spot on for how can we make this happen now fast? Let's not let another 30 years go.
I mean, it's funny. Redcliffe Maud was very much about, and what came out in the legislation that Lord Heseltine took through the Commons in 1972, that created 1974 Act, whatever I think. Was about trying to come up with a national solution. And I'm not sure local government really ever fully accepted it. I'm not sure the Met counties were ever fully accepted. And of course, within a generation, the Conservative government had abolished it. So what I take from that is that top-down change is really hard to get right. One of the things that I was in Greater Manchester and was one of the people absolutely at the heart of negotiating our devolution deals alongside Howard Bernstein, working with George Osborne and John Kingman and Neil O'Brien. And what I took from that was that the initiative of it being bottom up, of it being something a place wanted, and then other places piling in because they wanted it, was probably at least as good a solution, in some ways maybe better, because it meant that those places were really enthusiastic. They were having something that they wanted. It wasn't being imposed. It was to a degree negotiated, argued through Whitehall by the Chancellor himself very often. The problem, as Lord Heseltine and Heather have both in their different ways intimated, is that that's just seems to have stopped in its tracks. Theresa May's administration, what we thought was going to do more, but didn't really. And this administration seems lukewarm on the idea of a city-region devolution. So I'm afraid before we have action, there's got to be the will for action, but that will require central government to want to empower places. And I fear that emboldened by success with things like the vaccine. Thank God, by the way, the vaccine task force is working, but not every problem is amenable solution that way. So I think the start of this is going to be the government wanting to see devolution. But then places, the Nottinghams, the Derbys, all the other places, and the places that got devolution have got to continue to be hungry, to want more powers, more resources, and to show how localism can make a real difference. I think Lord Heseltine was right. We've been playing at this for too long, and I think it takes leadership from the top of the kind we've only seen sporadically to really change that.
So what we've got to do is get the Prime Minister to start thinking about the future and start to realise that we've got to change the structure of the whole country to deliver a successful outcome in the future. Chris Blackhurst, you're interested in business, but you're also a lobby journalist, and you're always keen and interested in what's going on in Whitehall. What's your thoughts about government actually waking up and realising the job is only just beginning?
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I was just checking when the words Northern Powerhouse were first mooted, and it's years old. I go to the north a lot, family up there. I'm not seeing any discernible change because of the Northern Powerhouse. And what we're seeing across Whitehall is, as Lord Heseltine said, is these initiatives that come up. And now we've got a political one on top, which is levelling up. And nobody quite knows what that means. And none of this is joined up. And you've got different government departments doing different things. You've got central government that fundamentally doesn't trust local government, doesn't want to fund local government, doesn't want to allow them to have money. We're in this sort of stasis situation, which we've been for almost decades now. We can see things that are wrong. We know that business rate system is wrong. It's still not being changed. I mean, I could list probably 20 items, and it comes down really, I think, to the sclerotic nature of Whitehall government. Some of the key jobs in this area, key departments, don't have the seniority. I mean, we have on this webinar probably the one minister, I can't think of any others actually, who actually in his time, because I interviewed him at the DTI, he elevated the DTI, and it was put to the very top of the Whitehall pecking order. And now I think you'd be hard pressed to make a case for Biz to be anywhere in the Whitehall pecking order, and it needs shaking up, and we need a House of Lords that is addressing these issues, and we need people in charge, as Michael has said, in the different areas. But fundamentally, I believe it has to come from the top. And I think at the moment we have a Prime Minister who I think is suspicious and distrustful, and the people around him are suspicious and distrustful of local government and of people in local government. They don't like it, and so what we're seeing is a succession of initiatives, projects. They don't seem to bear any link to each other. There's different things, the announcements on hospitals, on railways, on roads, but there's no central coming together at all. I don't know if that's what Michael Heseltine would agree with or not, but that's my take.
Lord Heseltine, it seems that the first person we've got to do is find someone who takes responsibility for the whole of the country to make a decision about this one issue. You've been in Whitehall. You know it better than any of us can ever imagine. What makes a leader turn around and actually decide that there is no avoiding the situation? How do we get this administration to realise that your considerable life's work and the country now needs addressing now?
Well, there are only two ways to answer that question. One is conviction, that if a leader has a view which they believe to be the right one and are prepared to use their powers of patronage and leadership to implement, that's one way. The other is pressure, political pressure. And the only source of pressure that I can see in this particular context are the metropolitan mayors themselves. They, I think, are, how can I say this, because I know many of them well and get on very well with them. I think they're not making enough trouble for the Prime Minister. They should be demanding meetings with him. They should be submitting an agenda where they want results. And look, let's be frank about the politics of this, because now a fair proportion of them are Labour mayors, but not all of them, and very distinguished Conservative exceptions exist. But I can hear the argument in the Conservative Party, which says, well, now look out, we don't want to let these guys muscle in on the act. And we've now got the red wall falling at our feet, and we are doing well without sharing power with local government, thank you. Now that is an argument. It's a completely phony argument, because at the moment, COVID is blanketing everything else. It's drawn a curtain over the whole political debate. Now, pray God, COVID is not a permanent feature, and that the great progress that's been made will be continued. When that happens, there are two agendas which are going to come right up front. First, Brexit and the consequences on the British economy of the adjustments that will make. And secondly, levelling up. And if the Conservatives think that they can avoid the Labour Party using their mayoral frontline troops in order to attack the government on this issue, they are wrong. They will certainly, in my view, the Labour Party will use their mayoral frontline troops. And so the Conservatives have got a choice. They either take them on, or they construct a partnership with them, which means that both sides gain and there is genuine levelling up. I think that is the wise way to do it. But if they want to really make further progress, and I think they should go for unitary counties, which will mean that you not only have Labour metro mayors, but you have a considerable number of Conservative mayors. And I have no doubt that that would actually, again, give a very substantial boost to the credibility of the Conservative Party. If I can give you one example of where I think this could be relevant. At the moment, the whole Scottish debate seems to me about separatism, which I, of course, wholly oppose. if I was a Conservative in Scotland, I would say that devolution has actually meant Whitehall in Edinburgh, and that what we should be seeing in Scotland is unitary authorities, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Inverness, the Highlands, so that, again, the local people have a voice, and the local agenda is based on the realisms of those very important Scottish divisions. If I was in Wales, I would say Swansea, Cardiff, West Wales, Mid Wales, North Wales. They are all very different, with different attitudes, different aspirations. And I would, as a Conservative, be arguing for a real devolution in the devolved authorities, as opposed to the one that merely replicates Whitehall in Edinburgh and Cardiff.
Well, I think that's absolutely the case. I think what's interesting is we are getting, ironically, back into a Chamberlain world of we're not confident here that the current administration is going to pick this up and run with it. In London, they were going to hand over the overground railways, and very quickly, I think it was withdrawn from the current mayor because they didn't want to give any more power to a Labour mayor in London. So we haven't seen any strength of character to necessarily go your route. But equally, we're not seeing from local government itself real energy and real drive to say we cannot sit here and take this anymore. It's almost out of that film about the news broadcaster. I can't take this any longer. Mike, if you were with a star chamber of the current major movers and shakers in local government, what route would you give them to deliver this change and to take the initiative to government and say, this is where we're going, what are you going to do about it?
I think Lord Heseltine was right a second ago. The problem is that the ambitions are not being set high enough. I think my experience of working with Richard Leeson, Hal Bernstein, and the others in Manchester was that if we cleaned up in terms of getting money out of government, and I think Manchester did a very good job of doing that and used that to close the gap with it in other places, it was because Manchester came up with big and bold ideas. It came up with the idea of the mayoralty. It came up with the idea of combined authorities. It came up with all sorts of other ideas as well, congestion charging along the way, which didn't go quite so well. That's quite unusual, but that happened because the 10 councils, Labour, Liberal and Conservative, worked together. Very often, with Labour just having a majority of the 10, sometimes only just, but they work together across political boundaries in a united desire to the place. And I think that's what we're not seeing. I mean, I'm here in Liverpool with Tony Reeves today. I mean, Liverpool's had its fair share of trouble of late, as when Michael Heseltine used to come up here on a regular basis. But what I'm seeing is the leadership of the city, the new city mayor, Metro Mayor Tony Reeves, the chief executive, going to be working with the people who are coming in to deal with the legacy problems, starting to really think big. And I think the solution is therefore for places to put big ideas back to government and say, fund these things, help us make these things happen, use the convening power of government to make these things happen. But for that, it's got to have a listening partner, and bits of government are listening. I'm not sure the most important ones are just at the moment, but that will be hard to ignore if more places come up with brilliant ideas, brilliant proposals, with working with their businesses to grow their economies and to level up, to create inclusion, to create inclusive growth.
Heather, imagine all the Metro mayors coming together with the county councillors network who have already made moves to reorganise local government. Do you think you can see local government putting aside its fear of loss of roles and status and grasping in the eyes of the need to change, to economically start to drive their communities in a positive direction? Can you see people coming together? And is Lord Heseltine right that the mayors can do a lot to do with this? I quite find it quite compelling that the mayors get behind and say, come and have what we've got and we want more as well, and this is how to do it.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, haven't you? I mean, the issue is that yes, they will come together and do the right thing, and never mind the politics of trying to deal with your group and all that kind of thing. if there is a reward for it. But you've got to have some sort of reward for it, haven't you? And that's and I think whilst you've got a central government that doesn't trust local government, then they're not going to hand over anything. So it's a sort of chicken and egg situation that we're caught in at the moment, I think. Just looking back over local government, I think there's normally, I'm going to say it takes about a decade for people within, I think Bevin said something along the lines of he started his career as a parish councillor, worked his way up, and then realised that the actual power, that he had more power as a parish councillor than he did elsewhere. I think suddenly, after a very long time in government, it seems to click with prime ministers or with secretaries of state or with whoever it happens to be. They suddenly realise, oh, actually, I now know what local government's for. I can see it now. I've got it. And that's round about the time we get kicked back out again. And at the moment, we've had quite a high turnover of prime ministers, haven't we? And I think that sort of having, and it's got to be someone like George Osborne or a prime minister that has been in post for a while. It can't be just a MHCLG Secretary of State. It's got to be someone with the power to convene across government departments, because as Lord Heseltine has quite rightly said, there is that sort of joined up nature doesn't fit. I think at the moment we have a prime minister who is a bit more intent on, well, frankly, blatant fiscal gerrymandering, and a bit more intent on trying to centralise some of the levers for things like infrastructure projects, because he likes to build things and he likes to take credit for building things. And actually, I think at some point he might realise that actually local government needs to have devolution in order to make the country really level up, rather than effectively handing pockets of cash, small bid-funded pockets of cash out. At some point, I think he'll realise that. I don't think they're there yet.
Chris, you always cheer me up by saying we're doomed and it's all coming to an end. The economics of the post-COVID, and let's use the B word, Brexit is at play today in our economy. It's just not that obvious, apart from in Northern Ireland. Is it the economic reality of our future that we should be getting behind and saying we have a solution, this is the way forward? And should we actually be going to, the metro mayors that exist today, apart from London, only exist because the Chancellor of the Exchequer got behind the policy which Lord Heseltine and Greg Clark were pushing? Do we have to go to Rishi and say, you're in a bit of a sticky wicket, you've borrowed a bit of money, here's our way out, come with us? And do we go and sell it to the Treasury?
Yes, I think we need we need a national industrial strategy, industrial policy. We don't have one. We don't know how we're going to. I mean, at the moment, everything we're seeing is it's all about building a railway line to the northwest at a cost of £100 billion. It's things like that. We've already identified the lack of trust, the lack of joined up, but it's also the lack of thinking about the future. Where are the jobs going to come from? What sorts of jobs? And it just isn't happening. And my fear is, and Lord Heseltine's already, or someone's, I think it was Lord Heseltine's alluded to this already, is that when COVID disappears, some of the problems of Brexit that are already out there are going to emerge. They're not getting the prominence at the moment in reporting, and that suits politicians very well. But it isn't good, what's happening. And I can't see where, what I want to know is, I mean, for my mind, we do not pay enough attention as a country to the economy and to business. That's what generates jobs. That's what generates taxes. And we do not pay enough attention as a society. And we have a prime minister who said business is absurd. Yes, he's playing some sort of tokenism with 30 business leaders trooping in for a croissant and an orange juice. But honestly, it's more than that. Where is the CBI? Where are industrial leaders, real leaders? They should be working with the mayors. They should be saying to Rishi, we want to do this. We want to build this. We're not seeing clusters around the country of skills in places where there already are the skills, but we ought to be building economic clusters. It's not happening. So I'm frustrated. I don't know what Lord Heseltine thinks of that.
Lord Heseltine.
Well, you're not as frustrated as I am, because I have this, and I have seen the spirit which was transformational a few years ago evaporate. And one thing that's not been mentioned, but it should be written large, is that Boris Johnson was Mayor of London for 2 sessions, and he knows what can be done in those circumstances. And he can't escape, because at the end of the first session, he said how clever he'd been to do as well as he had in order to get re-elected for the second session. So we have him on the record. He's hooked on his own vocabulary. But the fact of the matter is he has lost. Well, look, the fact of the matter is that within the central government at the moment, there's a great debate going on to what the hell they should do. And there are some encouraging signs. I saw the other day that one of the officials who subsequently became a member of parliament is now back at the centre. And that is an encouraging sign. But whether he can achieve anything, well, of course, I've got no ability to know that. But I know that there is a debate. Look, we can't afford the luxury of a debate. We want some decisions. And the only person who can take the decision is the Prime Minister. Believe me, well, it's perfectly true. George Osborne was a very important player in the devolution agenda a few years ago. But in the end, it had to be David Cameron who agreed to it. So if this is going to happen, it will happen because Boris Johnson says, I'm going to do it. At the moment, one is travelling with fingers crossed, but without optimism. And that's why I say the mayors should actually start activating their case. Now, I'm going to say something else which is open to misinterpretation. The Labour Conservative agenda in the Metro Mayor agenda is grossly oversold. I've worked with, take for example Manchester, with Richard Leese and Howard Bernstein, time and again, over City Challenge, over the bomb outrage, and time and again, I've had very close, very constructive work with the leaders of Manchester. I can never remember a party political issue coming up. What we were interested in saying is, look, we've got this site. It looks a bit derelict. What can we do with it? And whether one was going to build housing association homes or an industrial park or some greening activities, whatever it may be, nobody started saying, oh, you're a bloody Tory or you're just a communist or whatever it may be. We sat down and we worked out what the ideas were, what the practicalities were, what the money available was, and we got decisions taken. And so I'm afraid for the more zealous of the political tribes, this is not a message they want to hear. They want to believe that there are absolutely wonderful either statist solutions or free market solutions. Actually, what is needed is leadership and decision making. And most of the decisions could be taken by either a Labour or Conservative or a Liberal administration.
I certainly support that. In that many years ago, I had a long conversation with Sir Albert Bohr when he was running Birmingham. He said he didn't mind who had the money. he was quite happy to work about how to spend it for them to the benefit of his entire borough. And in London, we have the pleasure of seeing Darren Rodwell in Barking and Dagenham, who has no problem with your political abilities, as long as you leave plenty of money behind you to the benefit of his community. That's just fine. And I agree. I think that has to be. But selling it into the Prime Minister, we've got this problem, because I think, Lord Heseltine, you are right that we can't wait any longer. And I quite like the mayors coming together. But how can we sell this story, Heather, to a man that knows what it's like to be a Metro mayor? So we've not even got a problem of he doesn't know what it's like to be. He's been the leader of London. How do we sell this story to someone who wants to go down in history? Is this the story that makes him the historic figure that he wants to be? He made it happen.
Well, I think he's seen both sides of this, hasn't he? He's seen seen how to be a Metro mayor, and he's also seen how to be challenged by a Metro mayor. I think Andy Burnham has not done the cause brilliantly when it came to getting more devolution. I think him flexing his muscles during the COVID pandemic has probably scared a few people, but so be it. I think one point I would make actually about the mayors is it's been an interesting democratic process. So the recent elections, largely the mayors that had good reputations were the ones that were returned again, and the ones who didn't weren't. And I think there's a really interesting, and I'm sure they would probably argue the toss on that, but I think there's a really interesting democratic point that actually the public seems to have noticed, not just voted along party lines, which I think I thought was quite heartening. So how do we sell it to Boris Johnson? I think he knows exactly what he needs to do. I think it's all about, as you quite rightly pointed out, it is about how we can create a history for him. Now, local government is rather brilliant at being given instructions of right, go and do this, grumbling an awful lot and complaining about not having much money, but actually doing it in the end. So I think what needs to be done is for it to be, so for example, if the agenda now is not devolution, it's about levelling up. And actually, local government is the one organisation that is in the position to work with all the local partners, all the local businesses, all the local universities, on skills and employment. That they are the ones who really should be holding the key. And if you've got strong local government, then that's what happens. That's happened in several areas. But it's just about creating that trust. And I think in the past, that's, as I said earlier, that's taken time. I'm not entirely sure we've got time this time round. I think it's just going to have to be, and hopefully bits of levelling up that start happening once it gets going. I think that's the point where if local government does act well, I think that's the point where central government will be able to see that they're doing the right thing, and hopefully we won't have another change of government if that trust does build up.
What's interesting is we talked about the crisis that a lot of the local authorities are in, and there is some seriously damaged balance sheets and local authorities out there putting on a very brave face, not sure where to go. But if let's say the local government association steps up and takes the leadership and says, I don't want the bailout. I don't want this from a point of weakness. We are going to go and present a point of strength. Can they, with the mayors, be the turning point where people will start to listen? Because local government is Conservative control at the moment.
Yeah. So again, I always think with as we've identified the Conservative control. I mean, I always go back to the days of Sandy Bruce Lockhart at the LGA, who was far, far more popular with the Labour government than most of the Labour politicians. So I'm not convinced about this political argument. I think this is about personalities. I think most big political wins, big gains are always made by the right person being in the right place at the right time, rather than it being a particular political party. And I believe that what you need is you need someone at the LGA and someone at perhaps the Treasury or Number 10 just being able to work this out together. And that is possibly yes, the LGA should be holding the ring on this, but equally individual mayors can do this, probably are in a much stronger position to be able to push forward devolution in their areas than the LGA will be to be able to do it. I think the difficulty that central government has is that it's got 300 different leaders from across the country, all asking for different things and all saying that they've got different priorities. Actually, if you've got a mayor, then you've got a single voice, and that's where you get the strength of leadership. So I think there's a really interesting point that single people can make a difference on this, I believe.
Mike, time is of the essence, not only on this webinar, but it's in reality for local government and our economy. What would you say is the fastest way to get this change happening on the ground, having experienced what it took to get the Northern Powerhouse, the Manchester Combined Authority, in place and functioning with the level of cooperation and support you had around you?
Well, first of all, something that Heather just said, I think far be it from me, because Heather speaks such great wisdom. But she fell into the trap that I've heard too often of late. People saying, well, it's not about devolution anymore, it's about levelling up. Of course, devolution is a means and levelling up is an end. And I'd suggest to you that devolution is a means to level up. There's issue after issue we've seen from the silos of Whitehall, having huge budgets, having to manoeuvre for years to make things happen. If you want to get things moving, as we see in times of crisis, time after time, get money onto the front line quick. And I'm not sure there's many better ways of doing that than, for a lot of things, and putting it through councils, through combined authorities. And we've got this infrastructure of these combined authorities. It's like we're running them on one cylinder. Fire up all the cylinders of these city regions, give the mayors powers and the business leaders in those cities. And I've no doubt that just as you're seeing with the increasingly bilateral authority to authority relations that this government seems keen on, that the mayors could carry more responsibility. And again, on something Lord Heseltine said, of course the Prime Minister's got to sign these things up. But I spent 2 years in Tony Blair's policy unit as a civil servant working on this stuff. I can tell you the real problem in the heart of all this is that we're too dependent on the right people being in the right place at the right time. Because the baronies of Whitehall just don't buy this agenda. They want to deliver through schools, deliver through hospitals, deliver through the criminal justice system, and then they leave the poor buggers running the cities to try and join it all together in the best possible suboptimal way. If Whitehall played with something like common purpose on this, the work that Lord Heseltine, Heather, all of us do, would be a damn sight easier.
Chris, so I'm going to put to you that the most powerful councillor from all three parties, the big parties, maybe independents, go and lock themselves in somewhere like Carbis Bay. It's quite useful for conferences, I understand, in Cornwall, with the Metro mayors, and they come up with an accord and a future. Are they going to get the support of the journalists? Does anyone, the media world, is it really focusing on what's happening outside London? Apart from GBTV, which is apparently not focusing on London, I was told.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I'm actually writing a critique of GB News for a newspaper. I've got to do it tonight. So earlier today I was watching GB News, and their reporter in the studio actually said the words, Birmingham, which likes to think of itself as the second city. And I thought this is almost typical of they're sitting in London. And yes, I mean, the problem is the media is far too London centric. They're only interested in London matters. All the power on a newspaper or a news organisation resides in London. It resides in the political editor and the business editor. And yes, I mean, I'm afraid if that conference took place in Cornwall, it probably wouldn't get much coverage. And if it did, it would be a sort of sarcastic page 3 poke, really, rather than there's a serious issue here and somebody needs to be doing something about it. And that's what happens. The media, you're quite right, the media does need to change. But then so do other organisations as well, as I mentioned earlier. I mean, maybe it's a bête noire of mine, but I look vainly at the CBI for some sense of leadership, and I don't see it. I don't see anybody leading the private sector. It's fragmented. I'd like to see them at this gathering at Cornwall. It's a good idea.
Well, thank you for that. We're getting very close. I wanted to just bring in, we've had 2 questions come up, and that's one person has sort of said, what are the implications for our coastal communities? But that's parcel of unitarisation and getting more resource, more growth, stronger leadership into those towns. We talked about Blackpool. There's also an issue of if we unitarise the county councils, are the size of the councils taking out the word local? I don't think they are they? I don't think that's what anyone's intended. It's just a scale of what is local. And certainly everyone I know who lives in Surrey live in Surrey. They don't actually know about their borough councils very often. And I live in Berkshire, and there are 6 unitary councils in Berkshire. So I actually think that's possibly a good route. Lord Heseltine, I've got a horrible thing to tell you. You can't step down yet, because in 1 hour, we've found that we agree with you a lot more than we could possibly disagree with you. But we haven't yet found the person that can make this happen. Yet I think you've filled me with total fear that if we don't do it soon, we're going to pay the consequences for generations to come. How can we... Do you have any final thoughts about how this agenda goes forward, rather than you having to stand up and keep reminding us of the peril that we're facing?
Well, I'm in a difficult position because I've written about 3 or 4 reports on this subject. I haven't anything new to say, because what we need to know, we already know. We know how to achieve the changes that are necessary. And so I'm left with this uncomfortable single thought. Unless Boris Johnson does something about it, it will drift on. And I like the point was made about the national press. They could propel the agenda forward, but they would only do it if they actually thought there was some momentum behind the agenda. And the trouble is that there are endless pressure groups, many of which have been discussed this afternoon, who are divided on this critical issue. I mean, turkeys don't vote for Christmas. Let's not mince our language. And the bring about the changes are necessary. A lot of vested interests are going to see their power diminished. Good. Providing in that place you put people with real power to do real things. And the only way you will get that done is if a Prime Minister stamps his tiny foot and saying, this is what we're going to do. I have a majority of 80. There's a 3-line whip, and we are going to do it now.
Lord Heseltine, we all agree with you, and it's now a responsibility for Mike, Chris, Heather, and I to join you on that journey and to use our own influences, Mr. Blackhurst, with your article that you're going to write to make that happen. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I think this really is the burning issue for everyone who cares about their communities and local government. It's something that needs to happen. It can't take another 30 or 40 years. We don't need any more reports. We've been told very clearly. Metro mayors, the challenge is there. And one of the extraordinary things about Chamberlain, which I didn't realise I was going to completely use as the link, was he didn't wait for government. He got on with it and he started to walk into the space that government wasn't filling at the time. And then government had to catch up with him rather fast. I think that there's, for all those people out there with aspirations of making a mark on this world, a rather big gaping hole. So I look forward to encouraging people to step forward. Lord Heseltine, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Thank you to my guests, and thank you to everyone for watching, and thank you to Verity, Sean and Candy for being behind the scenes. Thank you and good afternoon.